Kan.
Så måste han. Welcome, everybody, to a new edition of UFO Man Live. My name is Tim, or UFO Man, and to my side is my co host, my friend, Tommy Highway. Tommy?
Hey, folks, my name is Tommy Highway. I want to thank everybody for coming out as always. We have a fantastic show for you this evening. Now, we were expecting, of course, Bruce Maccabee to be a guest this evening. Due to family obligations, unfortunately, Bruce had to disconnect the call with us, couldn't be with us tonight. However, we got very, very lucky, folks. We actually ended up talking to and getting Terry Lovelace himself to come over to the channel. And folks, you've seen Terry here before. He's one of our favorite guests. I mean, he's written several books about his experiences. They're fantastic. And actually, folks, he was actually very enthused to come on the night and tell his story again for you. I think we're going to enjoy this. Thank you very much for coming here, Terry. And again, thank you for being on the channel.
Thanks, Tommy. It's always a pleasure to be here. It's always a good show. I always have fun here. You get great chat questions and the like, and it's just always a good time.
Yeah, welcome, Terry. Very happy to have you here. We have a lot of questions tonight, but I would like to start out with, could you recant a little bit on your first book so you can give people an idea of where you're coming from and what your story is? Sure.
Let me I can give a capsule version. So we got plenty of time to talk about other stuff too. The event happened in June of 1977. That's when I was abducted with my friend Tobias, or Toby. And we, neither one of us had ever been camping before. And Devil's Den State Park in Northwest Arkansas is about a 6.5-hour drive, or at least it was back then, from Whiteman Air Force Base, where we were both stationed. So why in the world we decided to drive 6.5 hours when we had a dozen state parks, beautiful state parks all around us? But that's what we did. We became obsessed with this idea, for whatever reason. We drove down, and there were a series of missteps I don't have time to go into, but we got down there, and from the get-go, we planned not to stay at the campsite for two reasons. Well, a couple reasons. My friend Toby said, "Look, man, if we stay in the campground, we're going to have people to the right of us, people to the left of us. Yeah, sure, you got hot showers and electricity, but you got kids and other undesirables running around, and well, you might as well go camping in Walmart's parking lot." And I thought that made sense. So besides, it saved us $3 for the camping permit. So we actually trespassed. There was a chain across the road we were able to bypass. And even though I say it's incident at Devil's Den, I found out later, after the book was published, that where we stayed actually wasn't even in Devil's Den State Park. That chain was a property line that separates Devil's Den State Park, which is of course owned by the state of Arkansas, from federal land that's under the supervision and ownership of Bureau of Land Management, leased to a private individual. So go figure. Yeah, it was just by luck or happenstance, bad luck, I don't know, that we were able to find this plateau. There we go. That's the place where we stayed. And if you look at that, when we walked it back in the day, I didn't have satellite imagery. Back in the day, it seemed horseshoe shaped to me when I walked the perimeter. But if you get up over the top of it, especially, it almost is triangular shaped. But what's interesting is, there we go. They cut that grass. That place was manicured, and the grass was cut when we stayed there in 1977. Now, there's no paved road there. So somebody goes up there in a tractor with a brush hog, according to a follower of mine on YouTube, and cuts that grass. Now, it's federal land. What reason would the Bureau of Land Management have to pay 50 years worth of gasoline for some guy to go up and and cut the grass on top of a plateau in the middle of nowhere. Kind of interesting.
What a great question. Absolutely. I mean, there's government waste out the yang. We all know that, but that's a pretty interesting one, actually. Great question.
Well, I got a question for you. If they don't have a road, how did they get the equipment up there to mow the lawn?
Got to be a tractor. Matter of fact, I got a follower on Facebook who owns a landscape business down in Alabama, and he found this Google image, and he says he can see the tractor tires, the tread marks. It's a dirt road that goes up there. It's a pretty steep incline. From the side angle, you can really see how tall this thing is. The top of that meadow is parallel with the tops of the trees.
Wow.
So, yeah, they go up there in a tractor. Not paved to this day. Maybe that's to keep traffic off of it. I don't know. But we got we set up a campsite kind of off to the side. As you're looking at that image, we've been off to the right side. In that image, actually, it would be at about 1 o'clock. It'd be up toward the top at about 1 o'clock. Right where the tree line starts, we stayed. That's where we set up camp. And we did. Like I say, we were city kids. Neither one of us had ever been camping, so this was all brand new stuff to us. So we went out, we did all the fun stuff you do. We actually had a pretty good time. And we got us campsite set up, and we're just, we had a couple inflatable air mattresses, a $9 Kmart tent. Took some blankets from the hospital. We had a big, Toby had a nice Coleman cooler. We had a Coleman cooler with sandwiches and, the normal stuff you would take. And so we're kicked back on these air mattresses, and we're just talking. We got a nice fire going on in between us, and it was just very pleasant. Now, I know that this sounds really cliche, and I get everybody says, oh, that sounds cliche. And I admit it does, but I'm telling you, it's absolutely 100% true. And that is that the sounds of the crickets, the tree frogs, all the stuff in the forest that makes noises at night stopped. And I noticed that all of a sudden, we were having trouble getting our voices to carry across this fire. And all of a sudden, it's like dead quiet. And the only noise is from the campfire. And I asked my friend, and we had a nice breeze going. It was June. It was kind of on the warm side. We had a nice breeze going. Breeze died. I mean, it was dead still. Not only quiet, it was still. And I asked my friend, hey man, is this normal? You think this is normal? It got awful quiet out here. And and he's kidding me. He's like, yeah, don't worry about the bugs. The bugs will come back. No big deal. Don't worry about it. But it unnerved me. And we're sitting there carrying on a conversation. And a little while later, he says, hey, Terry, were those lights there before? And I'm like, man, I don't know what you're talking about because there ain't no lights out here anywhere. It might be a little more built up today, but back in 1977, I guarantee you there was nothing out there. Nothing. Maybe a faint glow from the campsite some distance away, but nothing else. So I can't see his torso's in the way. So I had to stand up, and on the western horizon, there was there were three little stars. They were very bright, and they just looked out of place, and they formed a perfect little triangle, and they were too far above the horizon to have been lights from a train or a parking lot or something. And they weren't moving. And I'm like, because my buddy Toby, his hobby was astronomy. So he thought this was a great place to set up camp because, if you're going to star watch, there's no light pollution and you're already on an elevated plateau. He was real excited to be there. And I said, look, man, you're the astronomer in the group here. Why don't you tell me, is that stuff that's supposed to be there? Are we looking at something that's inside our atmosphere, or are we looking at something that's like 1,000,000 miles away? And he said, I don't know. He says, stars twinkle because they get filtered through the light of our atmosphere. But he says, to my knowledge, there's nothing out there where this thing could be. Because, I mean, he knew the constellations. He knew stars. He knew when a satellite was going to come over. That was impressive in 1977. So he knew the night sky. And we just watched this thing for a couple minutes, and it rotated. When it first moved, it rotated like it was on an axis, and it turned about 120 degrees and stopped, and it aligned itself with the base of the triangle, parallel with the western horizon, and the apex of the triangle was pointed up. And it was just a few seconds later that started to climb up into the air, and it kept that 3-star configuration as it climbed. And it's interesting. Again, another cliche thing, but I've heard this from other people, lots of other people. When this thing started to climb up into the sky, I felt this sense of calm, this feeling of calm wash over me. And all that anxiety that I had about, the place going so quiet so quickly, that was all gone. And I was in a weird place. I don't know. I felt almost sedated. And attitude-wise, I was mildly even disinterested. I mean, I wouldn't call it apathetic, but I think for Toby and I both, our emotions were muted. They were inappropriate to what we were seeing and what was going on. And we just sat there and we watched this thing, and we saw the three stars, and it kept that configuration until it reached like a ceiling and then stopped. And then the thing turned over parallel with because it was triangular shaped craft. It turned over so it was parallel with the horizon again. And we could see 3 lights in a row. So the apex of the triangle now is pointed in our direction. And this thing stays still for just a couple seconds, and then it starts a descent, like a glide plane down. And it was interesting because it did a couple of somersaults where the front end, the point of the triangle, would dip down, and this thing would do a complete somersault. And it did that twice. And I had this feeling that was done on purpose, that was done so that we knew that we weren't seeing something out of control. We knew we were seeing something that was intelligently controlled. And I think that's true. I think that's what was happening. And it glided in at about 3,000 feet and came to a halt right over this meadow. Thank God we were kind of offset to the side. But it stopped at 3,000 feet up in the air. And yeah, that's actually an image that I drew in August of 1977. And that image is based on a image that I drew in a spiral ring notebook right after the event, because I wanted to preserve as much of it for memory as I could. Matter of fact, if you look below this thing and kind of to your left, you'll see a little tent, 2 guys in a car. I did that to try to give it some sense of scale. And I'll just say this thing was absolutely enormous. It was the size of a Walmart. So it was big. There we go. And it had these lights that were lit here and there. It reminded me very much of like driving through an urban area, and you see office buildings and the like, where obviously some people are working late, and there's an office light on here and there, but a lot of them are dark, and that's kind of the way this was. That top deck up there, at the very top, where it bows out a little bit, it bows outward, and that was like an observation deck, I called it. And those lights were lit. There were lights that lit that entire observation deck from behind. and we could see motion, we could see movement of figures, but we couldn't really discern what we were looking at. So that's a pretty good rendition of the thing.
Incredible. Absolutely incredible. Goodness.
How thick was the object? I mean, height-wise, was it thin or was it?
Because actually, Walmart is not a really good descriptive term. If you read the book, I describe it as being 5 stories tall.
Wow.
And I think that that's pretty accurate. And interesting, if you read David Marler is kind of like the recognized expert on triangle sightings. And that summer of 1977, there was in the Hudson Valley, a sighting of a 5-story, and her words were 5-story tall. She said it was as big as a medical building, triangle that she saw in the Hudson Valley. And then there was another sighting. There's a highway that comes from St. Louis to Kansas City. It's an interstate. I think it's 70. Been a long time. I think it's 70. And there was another sighting in August, and it was described the same way: 5 stories tall, triangular, huge. So there were a couple others that saw this thing. Probably a lot of people saw this thing. You know, what I don't understand to this day is why this thing wasn't seen in 3 counties, because it should have been. I mean, it was lit up, it was huge, and I don't know, but I don't know why we just sat around and watched this thing play out.
Well, the sighting itself from other people could have been the same reason that we always hear about is, frankly, people either are dismissing what they're seeing, or they just don't want to come forward. They, for fear of retribution, ridicule, things of that nature. We've seen that a lot. But one of the interesting things about your story, Terry, not to interrupt you, sir, but you have some very interesting life qualifications, let's say. You're different than a lot of other people. Can you tell us what you've been doing, for your career over the years?
Well, I got out of the Air Force. I finished a undergraduate degree in psychology, and then I went to law school at Western Michigan, got a law degree, passed the bar, practiced law in Michigan for a while, kind of my adopted home state. And then I got an appointment as an assistant attorney general for the U.S. territory of American Samoa, which was a pretty cool gig. It was a government beach house and a car and all the gas I could burn. And, they paid me very little, but the scenery was just gorgeous and the people were wonderful. So I was lucky to have that gig and did that for a while, and then felt like I needed to get back to the States, be closer to family, because American Samoa is 2,500 miles south of Hawaii. So that'll give you an idea of distance. It's the only U.S. territory south of the equator, so it's a long way away. So I got a gig with the state of Vermont. I was very grateful to get it, and was an assistant attorney general there, and did some medical stuff for their board of medical practice. And then retired in 2012. Moved to Dallas, where we have adult kids and grandkids, and got an X-ray in 2012 and found that I had never had any intention of writing a book or speaking about this publicly until October 2012, when I had some knee pain, and I get all my medical care from the VA, and I went to the VA and they X-rayed my leg, and they diagnosed me as having what's called a Baker's cyst. It has nothing to do with baking. It's, discovered by a guy named Baker, no doubt. And, you catch it like you catch a cold. It's a benign cyst that you get underneath your kneecap. And it's painful for a couple weeks, and then it goes away, and it's always benign, no issue. So the pain that brought me into the hospital had nothing to do with these things they discovered in my leg. But I asked the radiologist to show me the X-rays, and he did. And when I saw those images, there's that square structure above my knee, and then that kind of pedal shape. Yeah, that's the thing above my knee. interesting story about that. I went to law school with a guy who worked for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and they have the largest database in the world of electrical devices. And they assembled that after the Lockerbie, Scotland disaster, the hijacking, or not the hijacking, but just the bombing of the plane.
Mm-hmm.
And they solved that crime through a piece of a transistor or something, and tracked it down to a radio, and was able to track it down to a specific buyer. So they thought, as long as people were going to be blowing stuff up and using electronics, we should have this database. So my friend ran this image through the ATF's database and said that it's nowhere to be found. So that's interesting.
Oh, well, let me ask you this, Terry. Do you believe that your implants are government-based, in other words, terrestrial-based, or do you believe that your implants are extraterrestrial-based?
I'm really torn on that. About where their origin is from. As far as where they were made or where they were manufactured, could have been ET, could have been our government. I'm kind of split 50-50 on that. But I firmly believe that it was ET that put it in my body, because I have no scars. And this object is below my knee, right in the middle of my calf muscle. It's still there today. I saw Stephen Colburn at Alien Con in San Francisco in February 2020. And he was Dr. Roger Lear's assistant. And he's a science guy. And he goes to UFO conferences, and he has a bunch of equipment. And, for $40, he'll scan your body and tell you if you've got anything in you that shouldn't be there. So he didn't come to my lecture. I took off my little badge thingy I wore around my neck. I don't recall running into the guy, so I don't think he knew who I was or what my story was. I was just another person there to get scanned. And I didn't tell him anything. And he ran a bunch of stuff over me and says, "There's something in your right calf muscle." And he said, the area around your knee is highly magnetic. And I'm like, magnetic? It's, nothing but bone there. I don't have any metal in my leg. And he says, no, that's not the issue. He says, but he says they can magnetize a piece of wood if they want to. So, for whatever reason, it's still there and it's magnetic. So.
Well, as Dr. Lear was one of the pioneers in, of course, human implant technology, things of that nature, and he really stuck it out there for us, to be honest with you. He found that a lot of times that a lot of these implants would actually emit a radioactive signal, or radio signal, even low wave radio waves, something like that, within the body. However, he noticed that, in fact, he noted on several occasions where the implant was actually extracted, and then all of a sudden it stopped transmitting of any kind. Have you ever, I guess my question is, have you ever had anybody try to see if you have a radio? Okay.
I had a real interesting experience with that. There were 3 brothers that had a show called Ghost Lab. And I remember the name of the show, but I can't remember their last name. They're 3 brothers, and they're from Austin, Texas. And I met them at a UFO conference in 2017 when I was still writing my book. And, I sat by these guys and they were interested in my story. I was talking to Daryl Sims, and these guys were kind of listening, and they're like, "Hey, we'd like to film you. Why don't you come down to Austin and we'll get you and your wife a hotel room and come over to the house, and they have a studio in their house, and we'll film you. And I want to film you and get your story recorded." I'm like, "Sure." So we did that. And I had a lapel mic. It's a name for that. I can't think of it. I had a lapel mic, and I went through all the details. And we were wrapping things up, and I went to take the mic off, and I fumbled it. It slipped out of my hands, and it landed in my lap. And the guy who's running their soundboard presses his hands against his earphones like this, and he says, "Shh." And instinctively, I thought, this is about my knee, because the microphone is 4 inches away from where the implant is. So I moved the microphone directly over, and he says, "I'm picking up music." And he said, "I'm picking up mariachi music." Now we're in Austin. We're not all that far from Mexico, but my knee was broadcasting a radio station from Mexico.
Well, that's just not something that happens every day. Wow. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Goodness.
Yeah, very interesting. So it did have a radio signal to it. Another thing I want to point out that Tommy didn't mention is these implants that people have in their body have been known to activate only when they reach body temperature, 98.6 degrees. And they only work when your body temperature is at normal degrees.
They appear to be powered somehow by the actual body itself. And we're talking about in a very microscopic way or whatever. But that seems realistic. I mean, anything that we would come up with would need like a watch battery at best or at most or something like that. These things are just itty bitty little microscopic pieces of metal that when extracted from the body no longer tend to emit any kind of signal. And they are also some of those pieces of metal that we cannot identify with modern science, which is also something very interesting about this. Terry, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, I think you're right. I think that it's oversimplistic to look at it and say, yeah, that looks like an RIFD chip or, a transistor, whatever you want to use. It's way more sophisticated than that. And I think these things are probably, nanotechnology and artificial intelligence,
right,
some kind of biological matter somewhere, so that they don't, the body doesn't reject them. It's a mystery how they get inserted into the body. And there's just a whole lot more going on there than a human being can wrap their heads around. So,
which is a wonderful point, actually, because there's no scarring. If you were to stick, a person, let's say, with a sewing needle, you're going to leave a small scar. If it's like a knitting needle, something that size, that's going to leave a bigger scar that you're going to see an entry point. And with your implants and everyone else's, we don't see the entry point, and that's what's so weird about this.
That really freaked out the radiologist when I had the x-rays. I'm sorry, Tim, I cut you off. What were you going to say?
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that the radiologist showed me the implants on film, and I was stunned. I was stunned because it was validation that these things actually did at some point put their hands on me. I mean, I knew that at some level, but it was just hard for me to process. But he was insistent that I had to have a scar on my body, because he said that, I remember him saying, you can't violate the integrity of that skin and insert something this deep underneath the skin and fascia and there not be a scar.
One thing I'm going to suggest, a theory here, is they have transmedium properties, okay? If they can move through walls and they can move through ceilings, why can't they insert a medical device in your body without actually piercing the skin?
Beam it right in there.
Beam it right in or reach right in and place it, reach out, and there's no mark.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I'm thinking is what's happening. And we just don't have the technology to match it.
I agree with you.
This is just one of those subjects where we have so much raw data on. I mean, we actually have so much evidence that this is actually happening. And again, Dr. Lear was, just a pioneer in this particular field. I mean, everyone in ufology has heard of Dr. Lear. He did a lot of great work before he passed away. Now, Terry, you're just another one of those people, a living example, frankly, that this is real. This is really happening to people. This is something that's not made up. It's not the lore or tales of a drunken hillbilly. This is real, and you're just another example of that. I mean, this is gold. Thank you very much for sharing this with us, sir.
Yeah.
We have a question.
And there's nothing unique about me. I mean, I thought I was unique. I thought I was like in a very exclusive club. But man, I got to tell you, I got emails from a whole lot of people saying, let me tell you my story. And I think it's true. I think there are a whole lot of people out there that have been taken, and probably a whole lot more that have been taken and don't remember it.
Terry, we have a question from the chat room from Sheris Lou. What can they do? Are they trackers? Are they studying actually us, sleep pattern, etc., stuff like that?
I don't know. I wish I knew. The analogy I use is I think that they implanted me like we implant a lion on a Serengeti plain, and we get as much information and data as we can. I'm sure whatever they do with us is probably, I'm sure it's 1,000 times more data. They know where we go, what we do, what we eat, who we hang out with. They're going to know everything there is. I mean, there is no privacy, I don't think. If you have one of these things in your body, you have no privacy.
An incredibly advanced shark tag. Something that, they hear your voice, they watch you, they live your life. They could actually, in theory, be looking at your life through your own optical nerve, which is what's so crazy about this. And, and they could look at us, and they probably do look at us as a species as no different than we look at a penguin or a shark or, any other, let's say, lower life form, if you will.
I think that's spot on, because I think that disparity is the same.
Mm-hmm.
Look, we've domesticated dogs and cats for 200,000 years. And, I got a couple of cats here, and I come home and I can say, hey, how you doing? But unless it's feed me or, we can't have a conversation.
Yeah. Well, right. I love the Bob Lazar analogy, and I'll use this until the day that I die. Imagine walking through the forest. You're walking down a trail, and you come upon an anthill. Okay, a big anthill laying there. Do you stop to try to communicate it with it, and is that what you're doing, or do you just continue to move on because it's not that interesting? And I think that's a great analogy. I mean, what if we're the anthill? What if that's us?
Or what if we're the cats?
There you go.
We're just not that interesting, are we? Probably not.
We must be interesting enough for them to actually take the time to do what they're doing. So obviously something interests them because they have an agenda. What is their agenda besides what everybody thinks, which is hybridization? There's other agendas going on because other things have happened to people.
Think about this. 1947, we had Roswell. Sure, things may have happened during World War II. But World War II, they probably knew we were working on a nuclear weapon. I think nuclear weapons changed the game. I think
got their attention in a big way.
I think it did. Yes. One thing that I recall that, I've been in contact with a non-human entity that I call Betty. I called her Sue when I was a kid. And I call her my handler, and a lot of people out there will tell you they got a handler. They talk to them. And one of the things she told me was that detonating a nuclear weapon on Earth or anywhere else causes interdimensional bleeds. I don't have the slightest idea what that means, but I take it it's not a good thing.
Scientists have actually determined that when radiation disperses, it does disperse into different dimensional realms. It affects the fabric of the difference between our reality and others. It does like a ripple, a wave effect.
it's been theorized over the years by a lot of really top minds that when a nuclear blast goes off on the surface of this planet, it can actually be detected from many, many hundreds of light years away. That's how big that blast is. That's how much of a burst of energy is released from a nuclear blast. So that would lead to believe that, we've gotten their attention while the kids have the matches now, basically. We've talked about nuclear vessels, the very first nuclear vessels that were to sail the sea. They were harassed by UFOs from almost day one. There's all kinds of stories about that because they're very interested in our nuclear technology.
Yeah, I can tell you from my 6 years in the Air Force that, I was an EMT medic. I was a first responder. And as such, I met a lot of the security police guys. And I was active duty at Whiteman for 6 years. And guys rotated in, guys rotated out, men and women. And I had probably, I'm going to say probably 7 or 8 security policemen tell me, because this wasn't the kind of stuff they talked about. I mean, you don't talk about this kind of stuff. Tell me that there was a thing that we called the nuke bunker. It was a bunker where they stored nuclear weapons because Whiteman had nuclear armed B-52s, an entire squadron of them. And it also had the Minuteman II ICBM missiles spread out in missile silos all over the countryside. Because back then there was nothing out there. It was just fields and farms and farm roads. These guys told me that they saw a glowing orange ring, and the description was always that, a glowing orange ring over the bunker. And like I said, probably 6, maybe 8 people told me that story. 2 of them told me, and these were people unknown to one another, separated by years, that they saw this thing shoot a red laser beam down into the nuke bunker. So, if you read Robert Hastings' books,
Mm-hmm.
and Robert Hastings' UFOs and Nukes, he talks about that stuff a lot. And nuclear facilities, even nuclear power plants,
Mm-hmm.
have their
Bentwaters, and back in England, that was a UFO showed up at Bentwaters during all that hoo-ha that went on there, and actually shined a beam into the exact bunkers where the nuclear weapons were housed. And we've got Colonel, what's his name, Tim?
Colonel Halt.
Colonel Halt. Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, he's verified that he was the commander of the base, for goodness sake. So they're very, very interested in our nukes. But I'll tell you, Terry, not to go to a different subject, but I think what the audience would love to hear is tell us more about the actual interior of the craft that you experienced and the people that were in there and all of that. Sure. We'd love to hear that part of it. Sure.
And let me qualify that by saying that I don't have a clear linear memory of what happened to me. Not by a long shot. What I have is glimpses and pieces of memory. A lot of them come to me in the form of repetitive nightmares that I've had for 40 plus years. I can tell you what little bit I remember. And that is, I recall being inside this thing, and I wasn't, from the get-go, I wasn't sure if I was actually in the thing that we were seeing over our heads, or if they maybe took us someplace else. Because the interior, as big as I described this object, the inside of it was like the size of an NFL stadium. I mean, it made no sense. And I don't know if maybe they're operating under some different rules of physics than we are, or maybe they did take us someplace else. I don't know. But the place was absolutely huge. Everything was stainless steel or white. My first memory was standing there, and I was frozen, very much like Calvin Parker when he had his experience, when he was frozen and couldn't move anything except his eyes. That's the exact same experience I had. I could roll my eyes around, but I couldn't turn my head. I couldn't move a muscle. The only thing that I could do was move my eyes. And I was absolutely terrified out of my wits. And I was just trying to roll my eyes around and take in as much of the inside of this thing as I could. And I recall that it was so big that I could see people at the far end of the thing. And there's an art term for this, where the lines converge to show distance. And that's what this was like. I mean, I could see, barely see figures and things on the far side of this. And I had no idea what was in back of me because I couldn't turn my head, and the thing could have been just as big in back of me. I don't know. The little gray guys were all over the place, running around. They were very, that's a good depiction. Make them all gray, and that's pretty much what they look like. They were running all over the place, but, they were task oriented, if that makes sense. There wasn't a slacker. None of them were taking a smoke break. Everybody was running around. On a mission. And, I got a theory about this, and some people have agreed with me. I don't think that they're, and I think I may have said this on your show before, I don't think they're living sentient beings in the same way that you and I are. I don't think that they're self-determined. I think that they're like little robots. Mm-hmm. Matter of fact, that's what Calvin called them, little robots.
Manufactured beings. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, came off an assembly line.
Worker bees.
Worker bees. I use that term in Incident at Devil's Den.
So just to be clear, what we're talking about here is we're talking about a craft that is actually full of multitude of different aliens running around. You've got the gray guys doing this, and you've got other beings doing that.
I saw three types of entities. I saw lots of the little gray guys. I saw one guy. He was masculine. He wasn't a female. He was a male. And the little gray guys, I don't know if they are. I don't think they have a gender assignment. But this, out of the corner of my eye on the left, I could see this guy walking, and he walked kind of across my field of vision. And, the guy just walked with an air of authority. I mean, you can tell when somebody's a boss or this guy had authority and carried himself with authority. And I'm straining my eyes to the far left, and he's just barely in my line of sight. And just by happenstance, this thing, 6 foot tall, he wasn't gray, it was pink. No hair to speak of. Pardon me. He had black eyes, but not the big exaggerated black eyes like you see in the motion pictures. This guy's black eyes were like wraparound Ray-Bans. They weren't huge, but just we locked eyes for a millisecond. And this was the scariest thing that happened to me on that whole time that I was aboard this thing. Now I was terrified that, out of my mind the whole entire time I was there. But this guy really unnerved me. I mean, I thought I was going to pass out. I was so scared because I don't know how else to frame it. This guy was in my head. When we made eye contact, this guy was in my head. I mean, he downloaded everything out of my head. I mean, he knew me, he knew my wife, he knew my secrets, he knew my plans, he knew everything about me. And that happened in a millisecond. And what I got back from those eyes was just raw intellect. The analogy I like to give is, we used to have a dog, an English setter passed away, but she would come over and put her head in my lap, and I'd pat her in the head, good boy. And, He'd look up at me with big brown eyes. And, but like I said earlier, we couldn't have a conversation. But he knew his role and I knew mine. He knew that I was the alpha and I was in charge. And when I locked eyes with this thing, I was the dog in that equation. I felt that far removed from his world, his intellect.
Bold statement, brother. Bold statement.
It's a very humbling experience to realize that, human beings are not the be all end all. And it was a very humbling experience to me.
Hey, Terry, can you tell us a little bit about your experiences a little more in depth with the being known as Sue?
Sure. Writing that book, seeing these X-rays really opened a door, and it kicked up, nightmares that I've been having since 1977. And a lot of those nightmares are a replay of what my experiences were. And then writing this book opened a door. It's like when you poke around with this stuff, I don't know how it happens, but it does. And Sue was a woman. There's a terrestrial Sue and an extraterrestrial Sue. Terrestrial Sue was a lady of Japanese descent who lived in back of us in St. Louis, Missouri, and she was widowed. She came here with her husband, who was a GI in post-World War II Japan, and then at the end of his enlistment, they married, and she came over here. And I'd always liked this lady. She was just a real kind lady, used to bake some really cool stuff and hand it out to the neighborhood kids. And we all liked her. And her name was, she told us to call her Sue. And we did. And then I started getting abducted, probably beginning around age 4. And that changed the way that I looked at Sue, because from that point forward, I was afraid of Sue, terrestrial Sue, and I didn't know why. But the entity, I was scared to death of the monkey men in my room, but they would take me in a flash of light and a twirl of shadows, and boom, we were somewhere else. And we were aboard this, I assume it's a ship. And it was an oval or a round room with a padded gray floor and white panels all the way around it, is what I remember. And I remember that there were always the same group of kids there. And they weren't kids that I knew from the neighborhood or kids from daycare or anything like that. I didn't know these kids from anywhere else. But when I was up there, I knew them. And we spoke telepathically and communicated telepathically, as crazy as that sounds. And the woman who kind of oversaw everything was, I called her Sue, because she reminded me of the Asian lady that lived in back of us. So that's how Sue got her name. And I refer to Sue as a handler. I don't know if you guys have heard that term before or not.
Yes.
Several people tell me that they've had a handler, and it's just someone who's popped up in their lives repeatedly, and they are non-human entities. And, if there's anybody out there that doubts the existence of non-human entities, I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything. I can only tell you my experience, and, take it or leave it for what it's worth. But there are non-human entities out there. I know, because I've had contact with them. Now, this entity called Sue, right before I published my book in 2017, well, actually, published it on Amazon in March 10th of 2018. But toward the end of 2017, as I was, making final edits and trying to pull the thing together. And I tell this story in the back of it's in the last chapter of Incident at Devil's Den. This is the chapter my editor begged me not to put in the book. And he said, this is just too far out there. I don't know if people are going to believe you or not. And I'm like, you know what? That's okay. That's okay. It's the truth. It happened, and I want people to know about it. And what happened was in late October, third week in October, a few days before Halloween, I woke up in my living room. And I've never sleepwalked a day in my life. And I opened my eyes, and I'm like, whoa, how did I get here? And I'm seated in the chair I normally sit in our living room, and I open my eyes and I'm there and I'm like, what the heck? And it's dark. I glanced over at the security system, and everything was good there. And I hit a light, turn on the lamp, and I saw the cat was on the windowsill, all chill and just fine and happy. And then directly across from me is this 4 foot tall, what I first took to be an Asian woman, in sunglasses with a funky, weird wig, a black wig. And she had on a black outfit, pants, a blouse. There was a red scarf tied around her neck because her neck was pencil thin. And I think that kind of disguised that. And she wore sturdy black nursing shoes with kind of a high heel, I guess, to make up for her short stature. But from my perspective, when I was looking at her sitting across from me, she could have walked the streets in downtown Dallas and maybe not even drawn a second look. But then, my first thought was, I wish she'd take off those glasses. And just like on cue, she reached up and did that. And then I recognized her as the thing that I called the handler that I knew as Sue. And my second thought was, it's good to see you again. No fear. This non-human entity was familiar to me. I knew her. And I had an affection for her in a maternal way, not in a romantic way. But I really felt like it was good to see her again. And we had a conversation in my living room. And she told me that, she told me a couple of things. And I don't want to get into them tonight because they're kind of lengthy and they're going to open the door and I'm going to talk about that for an hour. We got other things to talk about. But
the one thing I'd like you to mention is about the tall 7 foot alien being that you saw, what it was and what it appeared to be to you.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. Oh, one last thing I should say about Sue, and that is when I wrote the book, I called her Betty, and I called her Betty kind of out of jest because the wig that she wore reminded me of Betty Rubble from the old Flintstone cartoon.
That's cool. Is that that's in the Reckoning, correct?
No, that's in the last chapter of Incident at Devil's Den, and I explained that. Yeah, I explained that, and that I explained that Sue and Betty are one person, one entity in the same. They're one and the same. They're the same.
Right. You mentioned Sue again in the Reckoning because that's where I found it when I was reading your book.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you about the insectoid thing because we were talking about kind of trying to stay on topic, talking about, the different types of entities that I saw. And I saw, the little gray guys. I saw the pink guy that scared the hell out of me, and I saw. I was standing there with my, like I said, frozen, and I had my clothing in my hand. They had undressed us, and they took me by the arm, and I just floated like I was a quarter inch off the floor. And they took me down a hallway, and there were what looked like aquariums to my right, and in varying sizes. I didn't see there were some that were big enough to accommodate, a human being, but I didn't see anything, anything there. The room at the end of the hall that they took me into, and they took my clothing from me, and they put me on like an exam table. But this whole experience had a real clinical vibe to it. I wasn't afraid that they were there to torture me for their amusement. It had a medical significance. And
so you were feeling like you were part of some sort of experimentation versus some sort of I don't know, a sinister purpose or whatever, if you will.
Absolutely, that's well said. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't benevolent, but it wasn't malevolent either. It was, something medical. That's it. So, but the thing that was doing the work on me was the 7-foot tall insectoid thing that looked like a praying mantis with a big triangular shaped head. Yeah, there we go. And what, really stuck with me were a couple things. It had multifaceted eyes, like insect eyes. If you've ever looked closely at an insect's eyes under a magnifying glass or a microscope, you can see that it's actually not one lens like we have, the whites of our eyes, the sclera, the iris, the pupil, and we got one lens in each eye, where insects have, I don't know how many, 50, 100, who knows? I don't know. But it's multi-lensed, multiple lenses in each eye. And I was screaming because this guy, and I picture this insectoid thing. I always picture in my mind's eye, he's wearing a white lab coat. And I don't think he was really wearing a white lab coat. I think that was a screen memory, something they imprinted in me to legitimize it, to make it less frightening, maybe.
We've actually talked about this phenomenon before. When the mind actually witnesses something that it cannot explain, it'll tend to go to something more familiar to try to, let's say, legitimize what the eyes are seeing. And I think I've been there before. Tim's been there before. A lot of other people. So I know exactly what you mean.
Or deal with it, for that matter.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. You go to the familiar. That's where your mind goes.
I mean, you were talking to us a little earlier before the live stream in regards to medical procedures done on you by these insectoid or medically inclined insectoid beings. And I came out with this one picture you said wasn't exact, but it kind of gave an idea of what was being done, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. This thing was 7 foot tall, and the table wasn't 6 foot tall off the ground. I don't know how tall it was, but because I didn't climb up on it, the gray guys put me up there. But yeah, this guy was bent over and doing something to my lower back, and it hurt a lot. And I couldn't understand. I'm thinking if these guys are smart, because obviously they are smarter than me, why can't they break out some Novocaine, for God's sake? It was really hurting. And but I can't open my mouth and scream but I can't scream through clenched teeth. If you're in pain, trust me, you can. And I think I was screaming. I was filling my lungs with air and screaming as loud as I could, and I could not hear anything. And that confused me. And I continued to scream as loud as I could through clenched teeth. And I think that I got on this thing's nerves. Now, I've had people tell me, oh, well, that doesn't make sense because these things have no emotions. They don't get mad. I'm telling you, I think I pissed this thing off. I really do. And I heard with crystal clarity in my head, it say, why are you screaming? Stop screaming. You know we don't hurt you. You know we take you back. Now stop screaming. And it reached out with this big green digit and tapped me right in the center of my forehead. And I was unconscious. And then the next memory after that I had was waking up, partially waking up. I wasn't fully awake. I was over by the car, and I thought, man, they screwed up. They should have put us back in the tent. I swear to God, I had that thought. And no sooner had I had that thought than here are the little gray guys, and they were strong. I mean, and they picked us up and just tossed us into the tent. And I was out again until the lights woke me up, and that kind of takes it full circle.
It's just such an interesting story, and your story parallels a lot of other abduction stories in many ways. First of all, the like you just said, the last thing you said was the strength of those little gray aliens. Apparently, they're pretty strong when push comes to shove. There have been large men that have actually tried to resist these guys and couldn't do so. The other thing being is that they tried to put you back in exactly the same position or exactly the same state that you were when they abducted you in the first place. And we've also heard this before as well. One of the interesting things that we've heard over the years is that, especially during like a mass abductions, and they do happen, like you've been a part of that.
Oh yeah, Bill Simpson told the story of that.
People will wake up wearing the wrong underclothes for bed or whatever. The wrong men will wake up in nightgowns and things like that, and it's like it's because they've been abducted and the aliens really don't have the concept of I guess fashion sense or whatever. Tim, what are your thoughts on that one?
I agree. People have been returned, but not necessarily to where they were taken from. I mean, look at Travis Walton. He wasn't returned to where he was taken from.
I don't know.
And there was a couple of other big name people that were not returned to exactly where they were taken from. Now, I think in the Calvin Barker case, he was returned almost to the exact location.
The spot in the fishing, yeah.
Right. But there are other people that have not. And in regards to what Tommy said about clothes, that is true because it happened to me. I had clothes put on inside out and wrong side too, which makes me think that something happened. Now, alien beings have been credited with the fact that they do not know exactly how to put on human clothing. So when there are reports made of abductions, people are not actually getting their clothes put on correctly, or their shoes are moved across the room, like Terry was mentioning earlier, or
my socks were sideways. My combat boots were unlaced all the way down, and I knew I didn't go to bed with them like that.
Right. So it's weird things. It's like they don't know. It's kind of like when Terry was mentioning the handler with the wig. There were comments in the chat room saying somebody was dressing up like the 1970s. So it's like they got their time period incorrect.
Well, to your point in last week's show, Tim, and I think it was an excellent point, the Men in Black have been known to show up in three-piece suits that haven't been around for 30, 40 years. They've been known to show up in 1950s cars in the modern era. I mean, cars that you would think that you'd see in a car show somewhere, or whatever, even a museum. These guys are still cruising around in this. And Tim made that point last week, and I thought it was very valid. And again, it's that either they don't understand our fashion or our particular place and time or whatever. Maybe they're just indifferent to it. Maybe they're just, hey, I got him back here. I did my end of the bargain. See you later. Maybe it's that. Who knows?
Yeah, Daryl Sims tells a very interesting story on that topic of putting you back where they took you. And that is a very sad case that he had out of the Houston area, where two young kids were taken in the middle of the night. And instead of dropping them, you guys probably heard this from Daryl, instead of putting them in their own backyard, they put them in the neighbor's backyard. And the neighbor just happened to have a pool. And unfortunately, both kids drowned.
Oh,
So, and then,
wow.
That's surely about as negligent as you can get. But, there has to be a distinction between what's really just outright malicious and
A mistake.
right.
Tragic.
Neil Bauman in the chat room said I was taken off my porch and left on my neighbor's porch.
Yeah, I mean, are they reading addresses? I mean, think about it. If you live in the burbs, especially like the burbs and where I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, if you're above, you're let's say you're flying a drone, all the houses kind of look alike. I mean, there's really the roofs, the design, everything is really very similar. So, I mean, I'm sure they're probably trying to do their best because they don't want us to know that they were there for whatever their reasons are. But yeah, we've heard this before. I mean, there are mistakes or have been made. That's unfortunate.
Yeah. You know what I don't get? If these things are so smart and they're so far above us intellect-wise, how does that work? Like David Paulides made a comment in his excellent book series, Missing 411. He makes the comment that these things have never made a mistake, not once. They've never been seen. They've never been caught. It's an absolute mystery. And that tells me that it's something that's non-human, because I don't care how good a serial killer or kidnapper you are, the number of people in the thousands that are taken under mysterious circumstances, as spelled out in his books. And if anybody out there's never read anything by David Paulides, that Missing 411 series, as a matter of fact, the fourth volume in his book series is called Missing 411, The Devil is in the Details. And he talks about places like Devil's Glade, Devil's Lake, Devil's Glen, Devil's Tower, and Devil's Den. Devil's Den is in there too. Cool.
It's odd. Once in a while, I'll get recognized in public, and this has happened to Tim as well. Recognized from our work on the show or whatever.
Sure.
And recently, I had a guy I live in a military city, a military town, and I had a guy that's a former Green Beret, still in great shape. I mean, obviously a bad dude, and he came to me and we ran into each other in a supermarket, and then I said, "Hi, how you doing?" Whatever, and it was very polite. And then as I left, he was waiting for me. And he began to tell me a story about the fact that his wife and his daughter are both abductees, no doubt in his mind. And even though he is a former Green Beret and just, a super tactical kind of guy, totally trained by the military, he says that he had actually set up tripwires on doors and windows and things, all kinds of different things that he's done. And he's very frustrated because he knows that his wife and daughter are being abducted, but they just come in and knock him out like it's nothing, and like he's just a lump of coal laying there. And it was very disturbing to him. In fact, he kind of he didn't really break out into tears, but I mean, he was kind of there, and it was a very unique experience for me, to be honest, because no one's ever done that, frankly, before. But so I mean, it's the helplessness. A lot of people have likened the abduction experience to rape, frankly. And I guess depending on who you are, maybe that's accurate. I don't know.
That's accurate. Yeah, I think that's very accurate. I mean, I think the idea is, well, with rape, it's all about power. I mean, it's about,
Yeah.
it's not about sex, it's about power.
And loss of control from the victim, a loss of control. And if you think about that, if they can just come into your home and abduct you, no matter what you do, you could put yourself in a 3-foot bunker of concrete, and they can just walk in and grab you. I mean, that's pretty severe. That's I think it's a pretty big blow to most people's psyche, if anything else.
Yesterday, I think I told you guys I finished my classes for hypnotherapy, and I've started practicing hypnotherapy, and particularly I'm looking for people that need help with regressing, trying to process what's going on with them if they're having abduction experiences. And I had a guy yesterday who did all these things. He's had experiences. He's got 2 daughters. They come and they take them at will, and they've taken him since he was a kid. They mess with his wife, and he has cameras. He has everything you can think of, and the cameras just either go from 802 to 847 with nothing in between, or they'll go to all static. But nothing he can find works. And I was regressing him, and I asked him, I said, would you want to go back and you tell me when was the very first time that you had interaction with these non-human entities? And he didn't know. And I could tell that he was in a lot of discomfort. And I said, well, let me take you back. Let's go back in time, and count it down from 10 to 1, getting littler and littler, smaller and smaller, younger and younger, going back. And he got to a point where his stress level, his fear level was just through the roof. And I stopped the session, actually. But, it is a great example of these things and the influence they have over us. I mean, this poor guy is trying to protect his family, and nothing works. Nothing works. And that's got to be just very frustrating. I fortunately never felt like my family was in jeopardy. It was always just me, thank God. And
that's a very interesting thing. Normally, I would say a very large percentage of the time, abductions as we know them have been generally generational. We're talking probably 9 times out of 10. In other words, if let's say if your mother was an abductee, then you're probably an abductee, and your grandmother, and so on and so forth. There's some member of your immediate family. We've seen this on and on. But then again, there are those cases where there are one-off abductions, if you will. Let's say abductions of opportunity, if that makes any sense. We've seen that too. So I mean, there doesn't seem to be any pattern that we can discern as humans. I don't know.
Well, I think it's absolutely generational. I mean, that hits the nail on the head. I mean, I can tell you that that's valid in my situation. I've confirmed that. So,
yeah. And really, it's literally 9 times out of 10 this is the case. Now you get that one-off abduction here and there, that one-off encounter that turns into an abduction, or a wrong place, a wrong time, that sort of thing. And we have interviewed people that have had those experiences. We know that those do happen. But I'll tell you, Terry, it's very rare that we actually get. We've interviewed a lot of people, a lot of very credible people on this show over the years. And we really strive to do that. But, when it comes to your background, it really doesn't get any better than that. And for you, a person that has been, a U.S. attorney and things of that nature, to be brave enough, frankly, that have the guts to come out and actually, talk about your story and write about it and things of that nature, you're just the most credible person there is, Terry.
Well, that's very kind, and I appreciate that. But, I waited until I retired. I waited until I retired, and I got to tell you, had I not seen that X-ray, I probably wouldn't have told this story.
and then we wouldn't have met, which would have been a loss for the UFO community, because we find you to be a great asset, and we're glad that you're here.
Just absolutely super intellectual guy, absolute yard of guts for coming out, retired or not, Terry. My goodness, we so appreciate the fact that you're one of the dearest friends we have on this channel, sir, and you are certainly one of the most credible people that we've met. And that's really a bold statement coming from us, to be honest.
Well, you guys are very kind, probably too kind.
Okay, we want to advertise Terry's books. Here's his first book, Incident at Devil's Den, a true story by Terry Lovelace, Esquire, featured on Earth Files with Linda Moulton Howe. This is available at Amazon, so check it out, pick it up. I know if you send him a copy, he will sign it, send it back.
Absolutely. Happy to.
I did want to address one question real quick from Davy Jones Locker. He's a longtime viewer. We really appreciate that. He says, Terry, do you think that Jesus can help with these beings? Well, I got to be honest with you, sir, Davy. We don't really get into the religious aspects of alien contact and things like that. I mean, that's a philosophical place that I don't know if we really have the kind of time to go. It's very interesting. We do know that that aliens have interacted with people, probably have shifted things biblically, if you will. We know that from stone carvings and wood carvings and paintings and things of that nature. But that's just one of those things that we kind of let's leave that to the theologians and not to the ufologists.
I wouldn't mind just addressing that briefly if I could.
All right.
And, I understand the can of worms we want to avoid here, but it's a real common question. I've had a lot of people email me and say, I was in the middle of an abduction and I called on Jesus and it stopped the abduction. I've had other people tell me that they tried the same thing in the same situation and it didn't work. So I don't know. I mean, I think Tommy's right. I'm sure no theologian, by any stretch of the imagination. So I don't know, man. I really don't know.
I could say this: there's a definite spiritual connection between alien sightings and interaction and the spirit realm. We've researched this over the years, and it's definitely the case. I mean, they can move through dimensions. So who's to say they can't move through spiritual realms? So if that's the case, then they may have a direct connection to the spiritual in the sense of Jesus. So who knows? There are theories out there that Jesus may have been an ancient alien. So keep that in mind. Or
consider this: maybe time is only linear to our perception of it. Maybe that's the deal. And these creatures can be coming from all kinds of different time spaces and all that. They could be, time travelers. They could be, I don't know, let's say, what do they call it? People that go back in time, archaeologists, if you will, and to check us out, to watch how, the primitive people did things or whatever. Who knows? But I'd say
you guys are spot on. There's a spiritual component to all this. And what it is, I don't have a clue. But I had someone from the TTSA agency. TTSA, shouldn't call them an agency because they're not. The
Stars Academy.
Yeah, to the Stars Academy. People that I like and I respect. I had someone within that organization confirm for me. I asked him that question: is there a spiritual component to this? And he was like, "Oh yeah, absolutely there is."
So there you got it on the UFO Man channel. Confirmation that there is a spiritual connection with UFO and alien encounters. You heard it here first, folks, from the man, the myth, the legend, Terry Lovelace.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, folks, we want to thank Terry for coming this evening. And again, we had another guest that was scheduled. Things didn't work out. Terry really bailed us out. what a fantastic storyteller this man is. Like I fancy myself a storyteller, folks. For those of you who don't know, I really do. This guy is a true storyteller, and it's always the same story every time. And he's one of those guys. It's like my grandfather's war stories. I heard them all a million times, but I could sit there and listen to them a million more, and wish I still could.
Right.
And he's just one of those guys that can do that, folks. And we are just so grateful to have him as a true friend of the channel, and of course, having him here this evening with us.
Yep.
And every time we have him on, we learn something new. I mean, the last time we interviewed him, we didn't know anything about his handler and about the praying mantis beings and the little gray monkey men. We didn't know anything about that. Now we know about that. So that's very interesting.
Absolutely, folks. Get out there and get his books. They are phenomenal. You're going to love those books. I mean, it's really it's a true story of what's really going on. He is, and again, you have to understand where this is coming from, this man's background. I mean, it really doesn't get more credible than this guy right here. And folks, get out there and get him. You're going to love him, I promise.
Thank you, guys. You're very kind, and I appreciate that. And it's my great pleasure to be here. I always enjoy hanging out with you, and it's always fun.
Thank you very much. We try to have a good time backstage sometimes, and Terry's a great sport.
Yeah,
so,
Terry's a great friend. So we plan on having him back several times again. So if you missed out on what you heard this evening, we will probably have him on again in the future in regards to this story, which seems to be a continuing narrative. So please come back and see us. We want to thank everybody in the chat room who participated this evening. Thank you for the 2 super chats out there, very appreciated on the channel. Black Lotus Productions, we will get a hold of you, and I will send the information to Terry. In regards to everybody who participated online, thank you very much, and good night from everybody on the panel.
Good night, guys.